Hey guys, welcome back to Intelligent Faith 315. My name is Pastor Jay. It's good to be with you guys. We're going to be continuing today with a series that we've been doing for some time, Ancient Non-Christian Historical Sources for Jesus of Nazareth. And again, Dr. Gary Habermas from Liberty University, he's written a dissertation on this quite a long time ago. And I'm simply reading through his dissertation paper and just hoping you guys, understand the great historical sources that we have, non-Christian historical sources, Roman historians, Roman emperors, Jewish historians, Jewish documents, Gnostic, a whole bunch of interesting non-Christian sources that we can look to and verify the existence, the actual historical, verifiable existence of the man Jesus of Nazareth, but also his life and his ministry and his disciples, how he died, and then, of course, how they believed in his resurrection, his physical bodily resurrection, how he ascended, and then the birth and the spreading of the early church. So all of these things are documented for us in non-Christian historical sources, about 17 or so. But then we also have dozens and dozens of ancient Christian sources as well. So we're just going to continue reading on through this. And the value of this type of information is, number one, there are still, believe it or not, there are still some non-Christians, some atheists, and other folks who they don't even believe that Jesus existed at all historically, just that his existence itself is a very questionable historical item. Or they're just not really sure if you can actually verify that. So this is valuable in the most basic sense for that reason, to help people understand and verify that the existence of the man, Jesus of Nazareth, is a historical, verifiable fact from non-Christian sources and also from Christian sources. And if the person you're speaking with is going to be a consistent person, if they're going to deny the existence historically of Jesus, well, then they better deny the existence of Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, a whole bunch of other individuals, because the historical reliability of the information we have for Jesus is much stronger and much more robust than the historical evidence for those individuals. So if you're going to be a consistent thinker, you have to at least allow this information to establish the existence and the identity of the man, Jesus of Nazareth. And then a secondary thing that it can do for us is this type of historical background and foundation, it can undergird the facts that are described in the historical narrative of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the New Testament. So for a person who maybe believes that Jesus existed, but you can't, for example, trust the New Testament, well, many of those historical facts and events and mentionings and circumstances, they can be verified against the backdrop of non-Christian historical sources, and we'll see that it holds up and it's a reliable ancient document. In other series in the future, we'll go over the manuscript evidence and the archaeological and historical evidence for the New Testament itself, but just right now, this information can in one way be used to support the historical credibility of the New Testament. So this is simple stuff. It's fascinating. It's interesting. It's just really good to know that there's even more evidence out there than just beyond the Christian sources. Over a dozen non-Christian historical sources, reliable non-Christian historical sources, testify to the existence of the man Jesus of Nazareth. So again, let's get into this now. And just to remind you, we've already covered Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian from the first century, Tacitus, a Roman historian from the first century, Suetonius, he was a Roman historian from the first century, Julius Africanus, Thallus, and we also talked about Pliny the Younger, who was a government official, and I believe we also mentioned Emperors Trajan and Hadrian as well. So these are all 1st and 2nd century sources, government and historical sources. And so today, we're going to get into two of the Jewish sources that we have, two of the Jewish ancient historical documents that we have, non-Christian ancient Jewish documents that, again, verify the historical existence of Jesus of Nazareth. The first one is the Talmud, very well known even today, Jewish religious document. And another one is called Toledoth Jesu. This is a non-Christian, an anti-Christian, actually, document that was composed in the, I believe it was in the 6th century A.D. Let me just verify that real quick. in the 5th century A.D. So, very, very old, but nonetheless, it's significant and interesting what they both tell us. So here we go. The Talmud. The Jews handed down a large amount of oral tradition from generation to generation. This material was organized according to subject matter by Rabbi Akiva before his death in 135 A.D. His work was then revised by his student, Rabbi Meir, and the project was completed in about 200 A.D. by a man named Rabbi Judah, and that is known as the Mishnah. Ancient commentary on the Mishnah was called the Gemaras. And so this combination of the Mishnahs, the oral tradition, and the Gemaras, those two together form what we call the Talmud, okay, for the Jews today. It would be expected that the most reliable information about Jesus from the Talmud would come from the earliest period of its compilation, about 70 to 200 A.D., known as the Tanaitic period. A very significant quotation is found in, this is the location, it's called Sanhedrin 43a. The Sanhedrin were like the Jewish Supreme Court of the day. As a ruling council made up of 70 elders, Paul the Apostle was on the Sanhedrin. It appears that Joseph of Arimathea and possibly Nicodemus were themselves on the Sanhedrin. So a very significant quotation is found in Sanhedrin 43a, dating from just this early period. Here's the quotation. Listen to this. Quote from the Jewish Talmud. On the eve of the Passover, Yeshu was hanged. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald went forth and cried, "He is going forth to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and enticed Israel to apostasy. Anyone who can say anything in his favor, let him come forward and plead on his behalf." But since nothing was brought forward in his favor, he was hanged on the eve of the Passover. Unquote. Dr. Habermas goes on to say concerning that quote, here we have another brief account of the death of Jesus. These two references to Jesus being quote-unquote hanged certainly provide an interesting term to describe his death. But it should be noted that the New Testament speaks of crucifixion in the same way. Jesus is said to have been hanged in Galatians 3:13. The word is kremamenos, as were the two males killed at the same time. The Greek word for them is kremastenton in Luke 23:39. So that Greek word for hanged is used of Jesus and of the two thieves that were killed in crucifixion. While the term crucified is a much more common reference to the event, however, the word hanged is a variant expression of the same fate. So what can we draw out of that passage from Sanhedrin 43a referring to Jesus? Well, here's 5 historical facts we can draw out. Number 1, the fact of Jesus' death by crucifixion. Number 2, the time of this event, which is mentioned twice as occurring on the eve of the Jewish Passover. Number 3, we can learn that for 40 days beforehand it was publicly announced that Jesus would be stoned. Now that's pretty interesting, right? Because the New Testament doesn't mention that. While not specifically recorded in the New Testament, such is certainly consistent with both Jewish practice and with the report that this had also been threatened on at least 2 other occasions. If you read John 8 and John 10, on those 2 occasions, the Jewish religious Pharisees and Sadducees, or the Sanhedrin basically, they collaborated to stone Jesus because he claimed equality with God in John 8 and in John 10. Specifically, and they said, you being a man, make yourself out to be God. He said, I and the Father are one. And in John 8, he said, before Abraham was, I am. So claiming equality, the name of God for himself from Exodus 3:14, the New Testament does tell us that the Jewish religious leaders wanted to stone Jesus. Interesting, because the Talmud says that for 40 days beforehand, it was publicly announced that Jesus would be stoned. Fascinating. Number 4, we learn Jesus was judged by the Jews to be guilty of, quote, sorcery and spiritual apostasy in leading Israel astray by his teaching. Now think about that for a second. It says here that he was judged to be guilty of sorcery. So, in other words, if Jesus was a peddler of tricks, some kind of a street magician, something that was not authentic or not real, well, then he wouldn't have been condemned by the high religious council of sorcery. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the Jewish religious leaders, as documented in the Jewish Talmud, a historical verifiable document, admitted that there were spiritual, supernatural powers flowing through the life of Jesus. They attributed it to Satan, to the devil, and that's why they call it sorcery. But my point is that they did acknowledge the supernatural power. And again, even the Quran, the Islamic scriptures, they also attribute divine miracle power to Jesus. Isn't that fascinating? Jewish ancient documents, non-Christian, Islamic ancient non-Christian documents both say that Jesus had miracle working power, as does the Christian scriptures, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So, fascinating. He was guilty of sorcery and spiritual apostasy. And number 5, we learn from the Talmud, it is also stated there no witness came forward to defend him when he was killed. So, let's move on to the next one. The next document is called the Toledoth Jesu. Again, this is an anti-Christian document from the 5th century AD after Christ. AD stands for Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, of course referring to Jesus. Toledoth Jesu. This anti-Christian document not only refers to Jesus, but it gives an interesting account of what happened to his body after his death. It relates that his disciples planned to steal his body. However, a gardener named Judah discovered their plans, and he dug a new grave in his garden. He removed Jesus' body from Joseph's tomb, and he placed it in his own newly dug grave. The disciples came to the original tomb, found Jesus' body gone, and proclaimed him risen. So maybe you're a non-Christian thinking, see, that's exactly what happened. Well, just listen to the rest of the story according to the Talmud. The Jewish leaders also proceeded to Joseph's tomb and found it empty. But Judah then took them to his grave, dug up the body of Jesus. And the Jewish leaders were greatly relieved and wanted to take the body. Judah replied he would sell it to them, and did so for 30 pieces of silver. The Jewish priests then dragged Jesus' body through the streets of Jerusalem. Now let me ask you, is there any historical documentation that actually took place? No, there's not. And so again, if this really did take place, there would be corroborative evidence, additional testimony and evidence supporting that fact. This is written in the Talmud, apparently, because they have to say something if they don't want to admit the fact that historically the evidence clearly points to the fact that Jesus literally physically rose from the grave as he predicted he would, as he said he would, as his disciples who died for their faith said he did because they saw him face to face, but they had to say something if they're not going to admit that. So, here we go. That's what the quote said, okay? The Jewish priest then dragged Jesus' body through the streets of Jerusalem, unquote. And Dr. Habermas says, it is true that the Toledoth Jesu was not compiled until the 5th century AD, so over 400 years after Christ's death, although it does reflect early Jewish tradition. Even though Jewish scholars scorn the reliability of this source, the teaching that the disciples were the ones who removed the dead body of Jesus persisted in the early centuries after Jesus' death. So again, this helped to start that rumor. It's even recorded in the Gospels that the disciples stole the body. As reported in Matthew 28:11-15. This saying was still popular when the Gospel was even written, probably between 70 to 85 AD. And in addition to that, Justin Martyr and Tertullian, who are early church fathers, they also comment on this. Justin Martyr, writing in about 150 AD, he states that the Jewish leaders even sent specially trained men around the Mediterranean, even to Rome, to further this teaching. And that is actually confirmed by Tertullian in 200 AD. In other words, even if the Toledoth Jesu itself is too late or untrustworthy as a source, in spite of its early material, the idea that the tomb was empty because the body was moved or stolen was common in early church history, as witnessed by other sources. So that just gives you some interesting historical background to one of the resurrection theories that the body was stolen. And so it's very fallacious, and there's numerous other aspects. How would the disciples have done that? Why would they want to do that? How do they overcome the guard? How do they move the stone? Why would they themselves, along with their families, suffer martyrdom, torture, etc., and believe a lie willingly and die for a lie willingly? Doesn't make much sense. So, interesting historical information from the Jewish Talmud and this Jewish document known as Toledoth Jesu. We'll keep going next time. Now we're going to start to get into the other Gentile sources. We've covered historians, Jewish and Roman historians. We've covered the Jewish sources, and the next time we're going to get into Gentile sources, starting with a man named Lucian. He was a Greek satirist, and a person named Marabar Serapion. So we'll continue with that next time. Encourage you to, as I said, go to GaryHabermas.com. You can look for this dissertation paper on the ancient non-Christian historical evidence, printed up for free. Lots of other great resources for Dr. Habermas on his website. Check him out. He is probably the #1 Christian apologist in the realm of historical apologetics, especially when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus. So thanks for joining us, guys. Encourage you to subscribe to our RSS feed. You can just subscribe directly on the Intelligent Faith website, or you can go to twitter.com and you can just go to IF315 and you can follow us there so you can get all of our tweets. I encourage you guys to pass around what you see and have an intelligent faith, guys. Be good ambassadors, good witnesses. Open up your mind, open up your heart, and then go and open up your mouth and go talk to somebody about the great evidence that exists for the Christian faith and worldview. It's true. Have an intelligent faith, guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.